just, and it took me back to Gaza in the first few pages, and I realized every day how much I miss it. But that really took me back to Gaza during that time period of which the book is written. It starts right before the first Intifada and takes us through to right before, I guess, 2008-9, that war in Gaza. But the book starts with the antagonist, Omar, who is in London at the beginning of the 2014 war and feels the incredible need to get back to Gaza. That I totally understood from the first utterance of it, and the push and pull of why he has to go, and the fact that he's leaving his son and wife in London. But first I wanted to talk with Helena. This book, as I said, this is an amazing book. I wanted to talk with Helena a bit about about the book itself, but also about why you, as the publisher, Just World Books, decided to re-release it now.
Right. Well, thanks, Julia, for hosting this. It's a real pleasure to work with the Museum of the Palestinian People now and always. So thank you for everything you guys do here in Washington, D.C. So back in 2017, I decided as the publisher of Just World Books that my husband and I had poured enough money into the publishing company that we could not afford to publish any new books. And I haven't, honestly, but I've kept all of our amazing books that we had already, works by Rifat Al-Arir and Miko Peled and Leila El-Haddad and other wonderful creators, kept them fresh and in print. And like that was it until obviously the Gaza crisis. And I learned that this powerful mystery novel vanished, written by Ahmed and published actually, first of all, 10 years ago, had fallen out of print. And honestly, it was never widely distributed here in the United States. And this book, as Julia mentioned so poignantly, takes the reader back to Gaza, not just to any part of Gaza, but to Jabalia refugee camp, which is where Ahmed grew up. And I had met Ahmed a few years ago. He's married to the most wonderful woman called Heather Masoud, who runs Zaytoun in the UK. So I think it was Heather who had introduced us. And then Ahmed contacted me and said, the book's fallen out of print. I said, I'll do it. So like, in spite of everything, I promised my family that I would not release any new books. I decided to do this. We put a new cover on it. The interior of the book is exactly what was previously published by Ramal Books of Cyprus, but we put a few new things at the beginning and at the end. And now I'll hand it back to you, Julia, to start the conversation with Ahmed.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you for doing it, because as I opened the pages and read the first part of the book, it struck a chord with me, and I imagine with a lot of other people too, that desire, after looking at what's happening in Gaza, that really strong pull to feel the need to go back or to do something, or to, as we're in touch with the people that we care about. And I was really struck by that opening for this book. And I said, yes, that's how we all have been feeling right now in this place and time. And thinking that it was a perfect introduction to what the exhibit that we're doing right now is all about, which is maintaining the collective memory and the collective heritage. And reading reading about reading your description through Omar of Jabalia camp also took me right back, as I have had the honor to visit. And I have very dear friends from there. And so it just reminded me of all of that. And I wanted to thank you for that too, as part of that collective memory of what it was, and what it can be again, or however people want to reestablish Jabalia for the people of Jabalia. Um, but I wanted to ask you, what inspired you originally to write this book? Because I wanted to also talk briefly after that about your movement from doing theater production to writing this book. So if you could, yeah, tell me about that journey.
Sure. Thank you, Julia and Helena. And first of all, thank you all for being here today. It must be quite early for you to attend a book discussion and a book reading, but that makes you Palestinian, by the way, because we tend to go to poetry readings at 9 a.m. and 8 a.m. In Gaza. So I remember attending poetry readings at 8 a.m. In Gaza, and it was just the most amazing thing because you start your day with poetry and coffee. It's great. So hopefully your day will only get better from now on after just listening listening to this discussion. What inspired me to write this book? I think, for me, Gaza has never been, the story of the people of Gaza has never been told as it really is. And from, I suppose, somebody who's lived through that experience, to tell the kind of development over the last 3 decades. And in fact, even going back to sort of the last 50 years or so since the Israeli occupation, since 1967. People think of Gaza and often about now and what's happening right now because it's often in the news. It's often being bombed, and it's in the news for the wrong reason because it's being bombed, it's being attacked. There are casualties, there are deaths, there are numbers. It's always on TV, etc. But they never look back at all in terms of where was it, how it has been. What is Gaza exactly? Do people know what the word Gaza actually mean? If you're interested, I can answer that question as well. What is Gaza's influence on the world, its position, and all of these things? Like, for example, the word gauze, or the material gauze, comes from Gaza. That sort of thing that we use in hospitals now for bandages and all of these things. We invented it in Gaza, and it was transported to Europe in the medieval times, and it was called gauze in reference to Gaza because it comes from Gaza. A lot of the royal families wore it as veils. So when you see all these movies of medieval kind of characters and they're wearing veils covering their faces and heads, that comes from Gaza. Gaza used to be the sort of one of the main exporters of wine, delicious wine from Gaza because of the delicious grapes that we have there. The poets, Imam Shafi'i, who's one of the main sort of Muslim philosophers and poets, was born in Gaza. So that sort of historical importance and location, it is never part of the discourse when Gaza is mentioned. It's always, Hamas fighting, numbers, death, all the time. So that's really what I wanted to do with the book in a way, is to bring the readers and people to Gaza, but only focusing on the last 3 decades to see where, how things have become where they are right now. And I feel that this is more important now than ever than when I first wrote it, because obviously, as you know, a lot of people think that the situation now in Gaza started in October the 7th, and before that, everything was fine, everything was perfect. We were living in a rosy dreamland somehow, So this is why it's important, I think, to kind of discuss it and to go back a little bit and see what the situation was like. What was it like to live under direct Israeli military rule? Gaza has been under siege since 2007. In fact, one of the main demands of Palestinians right now is to lift the siege imposed in 2007. That is never, ever presented in the media, but it is mentioned in the book, of course, because, as I said, the book goes over 3 decades. That is kind of the backdrop of the book. But what I really wanted to do is to present the humanity of the people more than anything else. I wanted the story of the people to be told through this boy who's coming of age, who's looking for his father, like any other boy, like having that instinctive feeling to try and find what happened to his father, and what seems to be like a complete mystery to him in terms of how could his father suddenly disappear like that, without being able to find out or leave any traces of him. I also consciously wrote it in English. English is my second language. My first language is Arabic, but I was educated in English in Gaza. I studied English literature in Gaza. And I chose to write it in English because I always write in English. But I also wanted to reach a different audience in a sense. I wanted to speak to the English-speaking world and present the story and take them into Gaza, to use my book as a vehicle or as a teleport, if you like, to take people into Gaza and leave them there for a bit so they can experience it. They can see it for themselves. They can see the street turns. They can see the cafes. They can see the restaurants. They can smell the smells through this book, because otherwise they can't go there. I mean, it's very difficult to go to Gaza. It always has been very difficult.
Thank you. And you do that really well in this book, you know, the
Thank you.
smells and the alleyways and the turns. But also you capture the very difficult parts of the occupation in a very human way. You don't come out and talk about it directly, but through the experiences of Omar, it's a very interesting way to do that, because the reader may or may not understand what exactly who all of the players are, but eventually you do. But it's a really interesting technique. And could you say why you chose to do it?
Yeah, because I think people need to understand that sort of relationship between the occupier and the occupied. And in Gaza, we lived through it all the way up to 2005, when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza. And they withdrew as in they kind of took their troops out, took their settlements out, and they remained surrounding Gaza and besieged Gaza completely, making it into an open air prison. But actually, when you read the book, I would invite the readers to also think about the West Bank now, for example, with the settlements, checkpoints, walls, where your daily life, everything in your daily life, every single thing, from your mobile phone contract to your bank account, to money exchange, to work permits, to passports, to everything is connected with the occupier, because they control absolutely everything. The telecom company, the Palestinian telecom company, Jawal in the West Bank and runs in Gaza, is controlled by the Israelis, for example. Our ID cards are all serial numbered that comes from Israel. And I wanted to explore that in terms of like that dependency on the occupier, because they've stripped us of everything, every single civil rights that we have, and they took away all of that from us to make us very dependent. Yet at the same time, they did not take responsibility for ensuring that we have our human rights intact. So I wanted to explore that relationship between the occupier and the occupied through the innocence of the little boy who doesn't understand all of these things, who questions things, because children do. And as they grow up, they get to learn of why and what the reason is behind it. So in this case with Omar, he's looking for his missing father, and he thinks innocently that the first person that should know more information is the Israeli governor, military governor, who's based in Jabalia. And he goes and thinks, well, surely they know everything. They control everything in our lives. Surely he knows what happened to my father. So he goes in there, he gathers himself, and he goes in there with all the innocence of an 8-year-old boy, goes to the military center in Jabalia camp. And that's when his life changes forever. And that's where kind of the premise of the book is. And then something happens there.
Ahmed, I'm glad you're not giving away too much of the story.
No.
Don't spoil it for the reader. But
No,
yeah.
I wasn't going to. But I was going to say like something happens there that changes his life forever. And then from then the kind of journey starts.
Yeah, and don't worry, Helen. I mean, the reader is left also. I was left to wonder, after being exposed to the total temporality of life, and that, so that you walk out the door, you don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know how your day or your life will be interrupted at any one moment. And at the end of the book, I was left to wonder who Omar would have been if it hadn't been for all of these things, and it was, I have to say, the book is absolutely wonderful, because it does raise a lot of these questions, as it underlines all of the difficulties and daily things that sometimes just happen. And it is the temporality, which I hear Palestinians talk a lot about, because you walk out the door, you don't know if you're coming back, with the checkpoints and with the occupation forces. Um, and so it really kind of surrounds the narrative in a very gentle and inviting way, so that you're left with these questions and you want to know more. Did you want to read a little bit from this book for the people that joined us?
Yes, I mean, I was going to read something else that I haven't read before, but because we're talking about this journey and this stuff, I think I'm going to read a similar passage that I read previously in a different reading, which I hope you will forgive me for that. But I just wanted to say that the book starts when Omar is 30 years old and he is in London. And it starts in 2014, during the war in Gaza in 2014. And the house where he lived in Jabalia camp gets bombed. And he is in the middle of the night with his wife in London, and he has a son who's asleep. And then he hears that the house has been bombed. So he decides to just book a flight to Cairo and go to Gaza, because there's something in the house he's trying to retrieve, some memory or something that he wants to get and to try and find. And as he gets to Heathrow Airport in London, he realizes, shit, like I've spent my entire life looking for my father and not knowing what's happened. So if I go to Gaza and something happens to me, my son is going to end up doing the same journey, trying to find out what is going on. So I'm going to write the story for him and try to post it for him by my own words, so he can read it and he can understand why I've had to do this difficult journey and why I had to travel to a war zone. So he writes it down, and the book goes into sort of like into almost like a letter, but the whole story goes, and as he's writing now down, trying to explain to his son what happened. So I'll read from the first page when he starts with the story. And this is from chapter 2. So chapter 1 is the letter, and then chapter 2 goes straight into the story. My father was gone. I was too young to understand why, and nobody was able to explain it to me, not even my mother. When I asked, she would always give me a sad smile, unlike her usual watermelon grin. I hated it when she did that. It frightened me. There was danger in that smile, which I could not understand, a hidden story that I was desperate to uncover. But she never told me, despite my desperate attempts to make her talk. Perhaps this is what pushed me to proclaim myself the youngest detective in the Jabalia camp at the age of 8. I learned not to talk about my father. Sometimes I missed him so much it hurt, almost as if I had nails running through my heart. However hard Mum tried to explain it to me, there was a hole in the middle of the family where Dad should have been. An empty space whenever we sat down to eat, a place that couldn't be filled by anyone else. Everybody had a father except me, and it hurt, but nobody wanted to know. No one listened when I tried to explain how much I missed him. But for one last time, I wanted to hear the scripted story from her so I could take it from there. Although I was 8 years of age, there was so much destruction around me. It forced me to grow up much faster. Or maybe I believed I did. So this is like the point where he decides, right, okay, I'm 8, I've heard enough of this story, the same thing of how my father disappeared. I need to go and find out what happens. With the innocence of this 8-year-old child, starts to gather information. And as the story develops, he grows up all the way up to 30 years old. So it's a coming of age story set in Gaza, I suppose.
It totally is. And, it's interesting as he collects little pieces of information, how he starts to put the story together, and it comes full circle. It is an amazing book. If you wanted to read from another passage that you had selected for us, you can go right ahead. It's a beautiful, I want everybody to read this book.
Yes, of course. I want to just kind of move forward again, sort of halfway through the book. It goes back to reading, kind of writing the letter in a way. So he's updating his son on where he is in the journey. So he's just arrived to Egypt, Cairo now on the plane. So he's told the story and just kind of like a pause Now I'm in Cairo. I'm writing from here. And the reason I'm going to explain the reason I've read this. So he was led by a short Egyptian police officer wearing a stained white uniform, a thin man walking nervously ahead of Omar as if he was about to be stabbed in the back. He kept shouting at his Palestinian deportee, insulting Omar for not keeping up with him. They went through the immigration desk, then right into the departure hall until they got to the airline desks, where they stopped at the Royal Jordanian section. Omar had his credit card ready, hoping that it would work despite not having informed HSBC that he was traveling that day. He handed it nervously, hoping that it would get him booked for the 6 p.m. flight and back again to Cairo on the 10 p.m. flight. The reason I mention that is that it's also talking about the real harshness of Palestinian life for those from Gaza all the way actually, well, actually all my life, like this has been my life, going into Gaza and leaving Gaza. We have no airport. We had an airport for about 2 years only. It was it opened in 1998 under the Palestinian Authority, and then it was destroyed in the year 2000 with the start of the Second Intifada. And all the way through, we always use Cairo as the airport. That's the only place we're allowed to use. So when we travel into Gaza and out of Gaza, at the moment, or before October the 7th, it took me 5 days to travel between Cairo and Gaza because I have to sleep on checkpoints on the way. Egyptian army checkpoints, the checkpoint closes at 6 p.m., etc. It's incredibly difficult to explain to people the kind of difficulty and the harshness of this journey. So, and I wanted to include that in the book. But the other thing that I wanted to mention in here is that most Palestinian men between the age of 18 and 40, they get deported from Gaza to the airport, right? So they're not allowed to enter Egypt. But both ways, either going out of Gaza and traveling wherever they're going, unless they have a special permit that they've applied for and sometimes paid a lot of money as bribes to Egyptian officers, then they can't enter Egypt. They have to go deported, taken by soldiers on a bus to the airport. I myself stayed 5 days in that airport in the basement in there many, many times, and then on the way back, it's the same thing. But in 2014, I remember this very clearly. This happened to a friend. And by the way, a lot of the stories in this book are stories that either happened to me personally or people I know very, very closely. Particularly one particular story in there, I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm going to say it's critical for the book, and it happened to a friend of mine. But I remember in 2014, a friend of mine was trying to get to Gaza to see his family, and he was stopped at the Cairo airport, and he was coming from London, and the Egyptian officer asked him. He said, "Where's your exit stamp from Heathrow?" And he was like, "What?" He said, "Where's your exit stamp?" He said, "Well, we don't have an exit stamp in Heathrow. The British authorities, they don't stamp. I think it's the same in the US. When you leave, you don't get a stamp. You get a stamp on the way in, but not on the way out. That's the way they do it, And the Egyptian officer wasn't having it. He was like, "Nope, I need a stamp." And he was like, "But what do you mean? I'm going to Gaza. Like, just deport me there." He was like, "There's no way, you can't, And it's about that control, like how Palestinians and Gazans are just completely controlled by all of these forces. And eventually he had to book another flight, go to Jordan just for like 2 hours, go to Jordan, enter Jordan, get a stamp in, stamp out, and then he was deported back into Gaza. So imagine that humiliation, that cost, that psychology, and also you're going into a war zone. You're worried about your families and all of these things. So I tried to capture that in the novel as well, around the daily lives that Palestinians go through, not just the struggle with the Israeli occupation, but also everything else around it and associated with it. Because unfortunately, as we know, a lot of these surrounding regimes that we have are very much on the side of the Israeli authorities as well.
Yeah, I kind of brought, sorry, Helen, it brought a smile to my face as I remembered, and only in a very dark way, a story of a friend of mine also who is trying to go back to Gaza from Malta, and there was not enough room in that basement holding area, so they handcuffed him to some water pipes in the bathroom for 3 days. While he waited to be deported. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is that deportation. So you don't have any control when you enter and when you exit. So you have, and taking that 10-hour bus journey from Cairo to Rafah goes through the Sinai Desert, and it takes a long time, 10 hours, I think it does. Or, but yeah, that there's no control. And I think you have beautifully portrayed that in the book too. You kind of feel like, why is this necessary? Why, what makes this situation so unique?
There is no need. I promise you, there is no need for it whatsoever. One of my worst memories about that, I was going to Gaza, and by the way, I go to Gaza at least once a year, usually, mostly twice a year, but at least once a year. And one of my memories there, I remember really clearly. Now, when I say this story to people, they don't believe it. I was in the basement, in the deportation basement in there, crowded with people, loads of people. And a man, with his 15-year-old daughter, I think she was 14, underage daughter. They were there. Then the big officer comes in, Egyptian officer comes in, and he looks at the daughter and he's like, why is she there? Women shouldn't be deported. She should just go. And they're trying to separate the 14-year-old from the father. And the father is saying, well, no, she doesn't. She wants to be deported. She wants to stay with me. And they literally beat him up, trying to separate them, and it didn't get resolved until more officers got involved, and we all got involved and shouting, and we're all being sort of shouted at and pushed around and all of these things. And we stuck up with him to say, no, this can't happen, but it's just, there is no reason. There's absolutely no reason. It's just the way we've always been treated. And that's on the Egyptian side in there. And that's because, yes, you can say it's Egypt and all of these things, but it's not. But it's actually Israel, because we have 16 crossing points with Israel, right? They only allowed us to cross through the Egyptian border. They don't allow us to have an airport. They don't allow us to have a port. If we had all of these things, then we wouldn't face that either. So the book really goes through all of these kind of journeys. Goes through Omar's kind of journey, and he talks a lot about that in a sense. But it also goes back to a little bit earlier, before 1967, to a world where actually there was a train between Cairo and Gaza, and people could travel freely and all of these things, and how these borders are just all imaginary, and that hopefully one day they will change.
Inshallah.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and say I think that was a really powerful part of your book, Ahmed, because right now in this country, people understand deportations and threats of deportation in a way that many people did not understand until like 2 months ago. So, your description there really speaks to that. And I think another thing that strikes me, I have done that journey from Cairo to Rafah a number of times. People who come and go to the West Bank through Jordan maybe don't appreciate how long that trip is from Gaza, and how horrible. What the Israelis call it is coordination. In Arabic, it's tansik. Tansik at the Rafah crossing is like, you can see, obviously, they're all calling the Israeli military to say, is it okay if this person gets on this Egyptian bus? The Egyptian local officer doesn't have any say at all. He has to go through the tansik, but that can take hours and hours and hours. So of course Gaza is still occupied by the Israelis, who control all these things, and of course the occupation has to end. That's the bottom line. But Ahmed, if you could maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing now, and what your like hopes and dreams as a creator are.
It's very interesting. This has come in a good time, in a way. So I'm doing a play at the end of the month. It's called Application 39, based on a short story that I published in the book Palestine Plus 100. And in it, I talk about Gaza in 2048, where Gaza wins the right to host the Olympics, the Summer Olympics. I wrote the story in 2018, And in it, strangely, and it's quite scary actually, I write about a massive war or a genocide that happens in 2025. I wrote that in 2018. Now the genocide started in 2023. I sort of imagine Gaza being divided into different states. And there's the state of Gaza, the state of Rafah, the state of Khan Yunis, the state of Ramallah. So Palestine's got its own kind of broken down into different states, which is kind of like what's happening at the moment. And there are robots talking to people, but it is a black comedy, dark comedy in a way. And it's the play is going to be at the end of May. It's part of the Shubbak Festival in London, which is a big Arabic arts festival in London. So they just posted it on Instagram. They launched it on Instagram. And then somebody wrote a comment in there saying, with all due respect, this is inappropriate. And I was like, what? So I responded. I don't think they knew that I was the writer. So I responded, it's like, fair, but can I know why? Why is it that? Why is it so? And I'm just looking at the comment now, and it says something. Let me just actually pull it up so I can actually read from it properly. It's said, how do you open this? So people need us to mobilize. Gaza is in dire condition today in 2025. Famine is on the rise. Must we imagine Gaza to be the service of this world in order to heal? We haven't stopped weeping and mourning. The genocide continues. Can we first imagine a scenario where Gaza isn't bombed and shredded and starved? And then, yeah, it goes on. Must I continue? And I was like, yeah, fair enough. That's absolutely fair. Of course we need to imagine these things. But that is not how we should think of Gaza only, that this is a place of war. So starts and stops, starts and stops. Our focus is we start and stop. We really need to be able to imagine the future. We need to talk about the future a little bit. We need to think of Gaza as a city like any other city, like a city that has great culture, great music, great food, great art just behind you, Julia, in there, and I think that's the only way to prevent genocide. Is because if we continue to think about it, that is a place that gets bombed and it stops, then it will happen again. Because that's how we've labeled it. It's almost like a, what do you call it, the boxing thing bag, that the punching bag. That if you see it, that's what you do with it, right? And I think we've labeled Gaza as this for such a long time. We need to move away from it. And I want to imagine a future where Gaza can host the Olympics, where Gaza can be a tourist destination, where Gaza can have an airport, where Gaza can have a port. And that's the only way for it to kind of stop, in a sense. I'm really keen to kind of explore more kind of futuristic kind of work and thinking about the future. We are doing an online event on the 20th of May. I've got together with a group of writers from Palestine, from Syria, from Lebanon, and we're going to do, the title is called Palestine After the Liberation, the narrative of the future, Palestine after the liberation. We need to start to imagine what Palestine looks like after the liberation, because if we don't, we're then just going through their game of violence and conflict and hate and all of these things. And I think for me, the future is there. We can see it. We know, for example, for me, the two-state solution is dead. So it's a one-state solution. That's the only solution. But what does it look like? How do we live there? How do we reconcile? How do we create peace? How do we do all of these things? Of course, you can disagree with me and say that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. And of course, we need to mourn. I need to mourn than anybody else. I lost a brother in this genocide, and here, I still haven't been able to mourn him properly. I'm stressing every day. I haven't been able to sleep. I need that too. But also, as people do this, I think we need others who are writing and imagining the future, because when we're ready and when the genocide stops and we want to build, we need people with a vision. We don't just want to look at the past and repeat the same mistakes of the past.
I remember earlier, Ahmed, when you were on our Palcast podcast, and we were talking a little bit about our mutual friend, Dr. Rifat Al-Arir. And you said that before the Israelis killed Rifat, you and he had a project to build a theater in Jabalia. Was that right?
Yeah, it was my idea. I wanted to build a theater in Jabalia, and he was fully supportive of it. We want to think, and we were together on Gaza Beach discussing this very same idea in May 2023. And I was there in Jabalia with the simple mission of trying to buy a house so I can turn it into a theater. And he was fully on board with that. And I did find a house. My brother thought it was too expensive, and he said, "Oh, come back later. I'll find you one, and then it'll be a lot cheaper, you know." I was like, okay. He actually called me on October the 1st and said, I found a house, book a flight and come. And I was looking at flying on October the 6th. And then I left it for a week. I got busy, and then October the 7th happened, you know. And yeah, Rifat is another example of what a visionary person he is. In fact, his poem, If I Must Die, is like, you know, he's kind of thinking of ahead, you know, and he was an incredible person in terms of trying to build a literary movement in Palestine. I mean, you just ask his students who were at the Islamic University where he taught, for example. He was the first person who talked about, you know, women's writing, Palestinian women's writing, Palestinian future writing as well. He wanted to start we wanted to work together on a Palestinian literary festival, you know, and we were talking about sort of utopia writing and futuristic writing and sci-fi and all of these things as a main element of it. So I think it's not really, I think for the person who wrote the comment, is absolutely fair. And you need to do that and do that, but don't stop somebody else from looking ahead. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm not stopping you from doing what you're doing, and I'm saying it's important. But at the same time, we need that vision, and we need that sense of like, where are we heading? Where are we going? What is next? You know, because let's face it, we may be losing this battle right now, but we're not losing completely, you know. Palestine will be Palestine. It will remain Palestine, whether they like it or not. You know, there are 7 million of us. They might get rid of 5 million. There will be 2 million. What are they going to do with those? You know, yes, they have the power and everything in there, but let's strip all of that away and think ahead, you know, in a sense. And I'd really like us as Palestinian writers and supporters as well to think that way and to write about that and imagine that as much as possible.
So, Ahmed, in the book, obviously there are some really scary and disturbing things that happen, but it is a coming of age book. Do you think this is a book that young people or teenagers should be reading?
I think so. Yeah. I think they can read it, of course. There is a lot of focus on friendship, love, and loyalty in there. The two friends, Omar and Ahmed, you know, thinking that they are really great, cool, clever, smart. They can navigate, they can investigate. They start their own kind of,
And they look
you
after
know,
each other. That's
and they look
true.
after each other. What's that character name from Agatha Christie, Mrs. What? Who kind of investigates all the kind of
Poirot,
ladies. What?
Poirot,
I think so.
Agatha Christie, yeah.
Agatha
Yeah,
Christie, yeah.
Agatha Christie. Yeah. So they kind of think they are like that, you know, and there's that loyalty between them and like the humor and all of these things. So I think, yeah, for young people, it definitely is appropriate. They can read it and learn a lot about what it means to grow up in a different scenario, in a different conflict, in a different context as well. I mean, I think if anything, they need a reminder of the privilege that they are in at the moment. I say this to my kids, by the way, like, you know, my son is 15, my daughter is 12, and you know, I keep reminding them that, you know, while I'm conscious, of course, of their mental well-being because they are affected by this genocide. They've been to Gaza many times, you know, they lost their uncle and it's been quite hard for them to kind of cope with and all of these things. But I'm also constantly reminding them about the privilege that they are in, that, you know, it's okay not to have the latest Xbox game, and it's okay not to, you know, it's okay to be rejected. It's okay to be, you know, to fail. It's okay, you know, it's part of life. And I think that this book, it does kind of shed a light on this in a sense. And, you know, coming of age stories, are always exciting because you learn not just about the character itself, but you also learn about the society around it. One of my favorite books in this regard is a Polish book called or novel. I forgot the name of the writer actually, but it's called Swimming in the Dark. And it's an incredible account of this young boy growing in communist Poland. Growing up as a gay person and falling in love with his friend, and it's just how you just don't learn about that only in that relationship, but it's also everything around that society and how he was sort of like excluded and how he's and that's exciting for me. I like those stories. They're very it's a good technique to kind of shed a light on the social structure. Now mix that with a thriller mystery as well, then you've got a whole kind of tapestry of, it's almost like a plate of the society and the social class and the different things in there. So, and I really hope that with my book Vanished, that you actually get to understand the Palestinian society a lot more than you would from news or just kind of reading about it, no matter how close you are into there, because you get to understand the difference between people who live in the camp, the people who live in the city. What does that mean? They eat differently, they listen to different music, and all those sort of nuances that you wouldn't get through news articles and other things.
Yeah, that's really a great illustration of what Rifat used to say, because I mean, honestly, fiction was never my thing. I'm a long-time journalist and like non-fiction writing of all kinds. And then when Rifat came to me with the proposal to that I should publish a book, and I can't remember, I said to Rifat, I want to publish a book. I think I approached him and we had a little discussion, like, should it be nonfiction or fiction? And he very strongly argued for fiction. He said, fiction is universal. Like, fiction transports somebody. And when I saw the stories in Gaza Writes Back, that 3 of them are by him and the rest are by his people who were his students and mentees, it was clear, like, I think it was one of his stories or 2 of his stories. He had transported himself as the writer into the mind of an Israeli, and then he transports the reader into the mind of an Israeli, or all the stories are so rich. So fiction is universal, just as you said about the Polish coming of age novel. So I mean, I just have huge respect for people who can write fiction. I tried once and it didn't work out. So tell us a little bit about your theater experiences, though. You wrote a play called The Shroud Maker that I think is pretty well known in London, but not so well known here.
Yeah, I mean, I always pick up things kind of sort of not absurd, I want to say, but sort of things that people kind of don't think about and write about them. So the Olympics, Gaza Olympics is that. The Shroudmaker was a play I wrote following the 2014 war, or war on Gaza, and that was about a woman who used to sell shrouds for the dead. You know how in the Muslim world we cover our dead bodies with just a shroud. We don't put them in a coffin. So this woman was a real character, and I read this news article late at night in 2015 or so, about this woman who had her shop open, and the journalist, was interviewing her, and she was 80 years old or something. And he was like, "Well, why have you got this shop open in the middle of a war?" And she just looked at him and was like, "Are you kidding me? This is the best time to sell more shrouds. The more people that die, the better. The better for me. I make more money." And I thought, wow, that's just like an incredible, character. Who is she? I want to find this woman. I want to write her
I have to
story.
say the same is true about journalists. I mean, war is really good for certain careers, and one is journalism, another is people who replace the glass in your windows, but of course this genocide in Gaza is like upends all of those things that we used to know about war, including like, where do they get the
Exactly.
shrouds? Where do they get the shrouds in Gaza now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was going to refer to that. Yeah, for journalists, I mean, in Gaza, not so much because they've been targeted, as you know, really badly. But as you say, like the war in Gaza and the genocide has actually shattered everything about the kind of rules of engagement and all of our understanding of what human elements are. But yeah, so I started sort of imagining her stories, the Shroud. You can actually buy the transcript or the text. It's published in the book, and you can buy it online. Published by Bloomsbury. You can order it online. And it's sort of like imagine that. So I went to Gaza and I was like, I need to meet this woman and I need to see her. And I went to meet her and I was like, hi. And she was like, what do you want? And I'm like, I'm writing a play. And she's like, play? What is that? Theater? I tried to explain and it just couldn't make sense at all. Like she told me different bits of her life story and didn't understand what theater was and all of these things. So I felt like I can't really make it based on her life completely. So I just started imagining. So I used it very, very loosely based on her life in terms of where she was born. But then I imagined her as a 12-year-old adopted by the British High Commissioner's wife in Jerusalem, a bit like the My Fair Lady style. She's taught music, Mozart, English, horse riding, etc. And then 1948 happens, and then she's abandoned. And then the Jewish militia comes and breaks into the house, and she has to run, and she has to flee. And as she runs, she finds a baby on the road. She picks up the baby. She becomes a mother. She arrives to a refugee camp in the West Bank, and she arrives there a young girl, 14-year-old girl with a baby, but no donkey or Joseph, as I say in the play, as a joke in there. And then she stays there for a while, and then after that, 1967 happens, and she has to move into Gaza. Later on, I mean, I don't want to spoil the story for you, but you read it. But essentially, what the play became the story of Palestine through this character. It's going through these different kind of episodes of key episodes of Palestinian life and history, such as the British mandate, it's not a mandate, it's occupation of Palestine, the Nakba 1948, 1967 Six-Day War, the First Intifada, the Second Intifada, then Hamas, and then after, and it goes all the way through in there, but all through her story, all through her journey, and nothing about those events in a sense, in terms of the politics in there. That is her going through them one by one, and she manages to survive, and she survives, and she survives and survives. Towards the end, it's basically comes back to the beginning of the story where she's getting a phone call where in 2014 or before 2014, the Israeli army used to warn us to evacuate the house before bombing it. And she's getting this call, and the Israeli army is warning her to leave the house, but it's from somebody she recognized on the phone. And that is the story. But you have to read it.
Wow. So that gives me two thoughts. Okay. One is that we need to investigate putting on a performance or many performances of the Shroud Maker here in the United States.
It's a mumkin.
Okay. It's on you, Julia. It's on the Museum of the Palestinian People.
We
That's
love
one-
doing that. I mean,
And then the other thought is, I'm 72 years old and I'm quite fit. But if you think about those older people in Gaza now, each of them carries like decades worth of stories, just like the one you have sketched out for us. And these are the people who are dying because they cannot be lifted out of the houses, or all of that human experience is just getting crushed and genocided. And people are always talking about the babies and getting killed in Gaza. I think about the older people, honestly, as well, and the people in between. But let's give a shout out
Well,
to
no,
the
no,
older
no.
people.
I think you're right. So my dad passed away in February 23. And he passed away after tragic circumstances in a sense, because my dad was a revolutionary, was into, believed in the future for a long time. And then there was a war in Gaza that nobody talks about in May 2022. I don't know if you remember that. And there was a bomb that fell right next to our house. And my dad, since then, like it nearly basically destroyed our house completely. And they almost got killed, all of them. And following that incident, my dad gave up on life completely, stopped talking, stopped leaving his room, stopped doing anything, and then eventually stopped eating, stopped drinking. We had to force feed him. He went into deep, deep depression that we could not do anything about. The doctors recommended antidepressants, which were not available in Gaza. And if they were, they would come in patches that would go to certain hospitals, to the Gaza mental health community, and very, very difficult to get them. Eventually, my dad died in February 2023, and I was very, very sad, and I couldn't be there for the funeral because, as I said, it takes 5 days to get there. So I missed the funeral. I was very sad, and it's still sad that I haven't grieved properly. But you know what? The genocide started, and I thought, thank God he passed away to that point, because imagine if we had to care for him and support him, to try and sort of force feed him while, there is no food to actually force feed. So it's a bit of a sad story there, but in a way kind of worked out okay in the sense for us. But you're right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, nobody talks about those people. Nobody talks about the other thing that has been happening in the genocide that no one talks about. And I know this, I know friends who unfortunately have passed away like this. There are healthy, young, fit men between the age of 25 and 40 something that are dropping dead at the moment. They're literally dropping dead. There is no reason, nothing. We have a word for it in Arabic. It's called qahr. It's because of that injustice and the qahr that they're facing. They just can't cope. Their heart is failing because of this, because they can't provide for their families and stuff. I actually have a friend. I lost a friend like that. He wasn't injured. He wasn't, nothing at all. Just like one day he just didn't wake up, and that's it.
Died of a broken heart or
Broken heart.
something.
Exactly.
So we have all these really terrible stories and experiences and emotions. I want to just take the opportunity to bring it back to the book,
Yeah.
to Vanish,
Okay.
and to how grateful I am that I've been able to work with Ahmed on bringing out the book.
Thank
So, Julia, I don't know if you have a last question or two, but
I
I
can see
won't, I
there are a
won't.
few questions in the
Yeah, there's some questions in the
chat.
chat
Yeah.
that I'd like to share with Ahmed, but also to say that, this book is an amazing journey, and I want to thank you for it, because, and I really, everyone should read it, because it is just a beautifully written uh, journey into Gaza, into specifically Jabalia camp, but also to give us a better understanding of living under occupation, but in a beautiful way, if that makes any sense, because it is so realistic, through the following the journey of this young man who's growing up in the midst of all of it as he tries to find his way and place in the world, um, through his misadventures and his adventures and his unintended adventures, and it's truly amazing. So I'm going to turn to my colleague Nadine, who is looking at some of the questions, if because there are quite a few here. So Nadine, you want to share the audience questions with us?
Yes, of course. So we have one comment from Barbara just saying that I think these are all things people need to know. It's just how to get the message out. That's just a comment that I thought to mention. Did you guys want to talk on that, or should I just move on to the next question?
I think just quickly, just to respond to that, I think how to get the message out is to continue to talk about it, and I think to continue to share and continue to, just not to give up in terms, because they want us to be to feel helpless and hopeless in a sense. But I think even by being here today, by listening to Palestinian voices, by sharing Palestinian voices, is important. And please don't underestimate the power of that.
Well said. Very well said. Another question from Miriam. She said, first of all, I cannot wait to read this. I'm already so moved and in awe of the storylines. Thank you so much for sharing these stories and capturing life/humanizing Gazans. Were there any secondary characters that left a strong impression on you? Why?
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, yeah, that's a really good question, actually. The character of the mother in the book, I cannot say much, because it's a secondary character, but also a key character in there. You will have to read, but it was actually one of the most difficult yet enjoyable characters to write. At some point, I had to stop for days, before I went back to kind of yeah, just kind of write and try to get it right as right as possible. And please, yeah, pay close attention to that when you're reading it. But I also remember sort of sections where like I just had to like stop. I couldn't stop crying in a sense. It just kind of brought tears to me. Kind of again, it's difficult to say without explaining, but you will find there. Also, the character of the Marwan, for example, the neighbor. She's that sort of figure that is there that holds Omar like a grandmother, like somebody who's just like a proper, sort of fighting Palestinian woman who believes in the future as well. I think that believes in a lot of things. Who's very empowered and very strong and very, yeah. I think that's a really great character that you should pay attention to as well.
All right, great. And we have another question from Ralph asking, why did you choose the detective genre for Vanished? And does that choice have any symbolic or metaphoric value?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this briefly in terms of like the kind of the thriller format. It allows for an exploration of the entire sort of anthropological situation and sociological situation there. It paints a picture of characters, of class, of everything around in between, I suppose. I think that's why I wanted to. It's also kind of the journey, it's the pace of the kind of detective, the kind of it starts here, and it just goes, forward, and then it goes backwards, and it goes sideways, in a sense. And I find that vehicle really, it's almost like driving a really kind of powerful car with so many buttons, and you can actually direct it to go any direction you want to, yet still you're in control and carry on with that journey. I suppose that's why. But to be honest, the other reason is that our life as Palestinians has been a detective, detective life in a sense. We search for food, we search for safety, we search for things endlessly, for education, for everything. Your life is constantly trying to track the next safe place, the next, hope wherever it is, and you follow that, you follow clues, and you follow hope and all of that. Throughout the Palestinian sort of society and history, recent history, I think since the Nakba, when families have been separated from each other in 1948, with, and also having, prisoners, for example, who are so many prisoners or hostages, Palestinian hostages in Israeli prisons. There are 9,900 of them, 400 of whom are children. Right now, as we speak, 400 children are in Israeli jails. Over 27 women at the moment, like there's something missing that you want to look for. My memory as a child is going with my grandmother, holding a picture of my uncle who was in an Israeli jail, sitting outside at the Red Cross. Every Thursday I used to meet her there. My mum used to send me so I could be with her and help her with for help my grandmother. And that's, it's always, as a child you kind of think like, what has happened to him? Where is he? Where is he sitting? I never saw him in prison. I never imagine that his life in prison, what it would look like. And that's sort of, and I'm not alone. I think there are so many Palestinians in that situation, either those who are separated by borders, checkpoints, or whatever it is. We have families in Gaza who have families in the Negev desert, that actually they're actually family members and separated, and they cannot visit each other in there. We have families that send messages to their prisoners through radio. They used to send, there's a local radio program, and they used to send messages there. So that idea of searching endlessly is always so prevalent within Palestinian consciousness, at least modern one. And now actually it's going to get even worse because of the genocide and all the missing people. Imagine how many people are missing under the rubble, because it's not just that, are they under the rubble? So, or are they captured by Israel and taken hostages? How do you know? How do you know? So yeah, I think that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think the simple answer is like it's a great vehicle. It allows so much freedom to tell the story and maneuver, but I think subconsciously it came naturally. That's what I was trying to say.
All right, thank you so much. I think that was really well said.
Thank you.
Truly, I feel like as Palestinians, we do live a life of mystery and trying to figure
Mm.
out truths and answers. So you very well done. And
Thank you.
finally, we have one more. It wasn't a question, more so just a comment from an anonymous attendee saying, I saw The Shrewd Maker in Chicago, produced by International Voices Project. Outstanding. Directed by Marina Johnson. Thank you for your work, Ahmed. I look forward to reading your new book.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that actually, yeah, that was a good production then. I couldn't make it then, unfortunately. It was just post-COVID, so it was very difficult and to kind of put together, I remember, but I think I joined via Zoom at some point. But yeah, so hopefully we'll do it again, maybe in DC.
Hopefully we'll have an opportunity soon. And I wanted to
Thank you.
thank you again, Ahmed, for all of your work and for having this discussion with us today, because it also links so very well with a lot of the questions that we are trying to ask as a museum here about the issues that you have brought up through this book, you know, how, and that Helena also brought up, that how do we maintain and build on and help to flourish and reclaim and restructure, you know, the Palestinian collective memory and the Palestinian cultural inheritance, and pass that on from to the next generation, you know, from the past generation. And it now seems to be, it feels like it's more urgent than perhaps it was before. And so we also ask people as they come into the museum to think about these things, whether you're Palestinian or no Palestinian, or you care about Palestine and Palestinians, you know, to think about how we can work to support that, how we can bear witness and what that means, you know, bearing witness for what's going on. You know, whether it's talking about books and looking at art and talking about theater productions and talking, you know, talking about Palestine, as Edward Said always pushed everyone to do. And so, Ahmed, thank you so much. And everyone, please read this book because it is
Thank you.
fantastic. I seriously, I just finished it last night and I wanted to reopen and start over again.
Thank
Because
you.
it also raised questions and trying to imagine for Omar what his life might have been like if, what it might have been like if it wasn't that, if this didn't happen. And I want people to also imagine that as they're reading the book, because it is a quicksand of unintended events and consequences that lead to an amazing story and an amazing outcome, and a very surprising one, I have to say. And I understand your fascination with the two women characters that you mentioned, both of them being very strong women, and each one having their own purpose and role in the life of Palestine, but also, of course, for Omar. And so thank you for those two strong women in this book too, each one having a different purpose, but fantastic, because you can see a lot of people in each one of these characters. So thank you so much, Ahmed, for all of your effort, and I look forward to hopefully welcoming you, inshallah,
Inshallah.
when you come to Washington.
Yeah.
And
We'll see if they allow me into the country. But thank you so much for having me today, and also thank you, Helena, for republishing the book again and giving it another voice and another life as well. I hope you enjoy it, and if you like it, please tell your friends, recommend it. Books have the power of traveling through the word of mouth a lot better than reviews and Amazon and all of these things. So the more you recommend it, don't lend them the copy, just ask them to buy it.
yeah, truly.
I'm joking.
Although book
Of course,
lending is also very good if you don't have any other choice. But also I have to say that the book is on sale at the Middle East Books and More, right next door to the museum. And I think you can buy it online as well. It is a fantastic book, and you will want to read it and reread it. And so
And great for book clubs too. I
Yeah.
mean, I think, you know,
it raises a lot of questions.
for a group of people to sit around and really talk about what it means to them.
I think that's a great suggestion, because like I said, it raised a lot of questions for me that I wanted to explore more. So thank you again, Ahmed. Thank you, Helena.
you.
And I'm looking forward to welcoming you both, inshallah, in the museum whenever
Thank
you
you.
can. Okay.
Or in Gaza, free Gaza.
And thank you for everyone who joined us today. And I invite you to come and see the new exhibit, which raises some of the very questions that we were just talking about, you know, about the reclamation and to explore the history of Gaza, because it has a very rich and long history, Gaza. And we have the pictures of the peoples and the places and events, and as well as the art and different cultural heritage crafts also. So please do come. And again, thank you, Ahmed, and
Yes.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you. Bye.
Ma
Bye.
salama.
Bye. Bye.